Hello, everybody, and happy June Dairy Month. Welcome to our Hordes Dairyman monthly webinar. My name is Abby Bauer, and I'm an editor for Hordes Dairyman magazine. I will serve as the host for today's program, which will focus on dairy rations and more specifically, feed additives. If you are listening to the presentation live, you can access a copy of the slides in a PDF format. Just look in the handout section of the control panel, click on that link, and you'll be able to print those out or save them on your computer. If you have any questions for our speaker as we go along with today's presentation, please type those into the questions section of the control panel, and we will answer those after the presentation. Our sponsor for today's webinar is Huva Pharma, and we thank them for their support of our program. Today, we welcome back a familiar voice to our webinar series. Our presenter is Dr. Mike Hutchins, a professor emeritus at the University of Illinois. Dr. Hutchins grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin and attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison to further his education. Since 1979, he has been an extension dairy specialist in the Animal Sciences Department at the University of Illinois. Mike is extremely active in the dairy industry, particularly in the area of feeding and nutrition, and he has given presentations and taught dairy farmers all around the world. Our editorial team at Hordes Dairyman has the honor of working with him on articles, books, and webinars. Mike, welcome to this webinar, and I look forward to hearing your presentation titled An Update on Feed Additives.
Well, very good, Abby, and it's an exciting topic, and really, Abby, you and your staff, I think this begins our 13th year of doing Hordes webinar. So it's really an honor to come back. And I think the topic today, hopefully, you will find challenging and enjoyable equally as well. So today's program, we're going to be looking at the latest data coming from the Hordes Dairyman Market Survey. That's always fun to look at to see kind of what farmers are doing. Then we're going to actually focus on these 4 additives. These are kind of new ones, or in the news, or certainly creating all kinds of interest. And then an update on 2 other ones based off the Hordes survey. And then finally, with my recommendations, and hopefully we'll get that all done in the next 45 minutes and get ready to vote. You'll get a chance to vote here today equally as well. So let's talk about feed additive definitions. If you go to NASEM, you'll see that basically these are feed ingredients that function in a non-nutrient role. You'll see from my definition, it's a bit broader. I'm going to make my definition feed ingredients added in small amounts in the diet. So some of these ingredients could have some nutritional role as you look at that. If you go to the NASEM book, and most of you have that now, go to chapter 18, and these are the 5 subsections they had. Discussions on ionophores, yeast and direct-fed microbials, silage inoculants, enzymes, and essential oils, and other phytonutrients as well. So certainly it's a much restricted one. There is really no discussion, for example, on sodium bicarb directly itself. If you look at my list, this is a bigger list that basically I adapted from a feed company here in the Midwest. And all you nutritionists, most of you dairymen, you should know what all these products are actually doing. I think it's a fun list to look at because it looks at basically 8 areas that an additive could function on your dairy farms or with your clients. Energy balance, big one. In the brown area, calcium balance, very hot topic right now. The next one in blue is immune function. And guys and gals, I think this is where the action is going to be with the trying to reduce antibiotic use in livestock, trying to stimulate the immune function. I think additives that can function there are going to have a real opportunity here in the near future. Some of them there already as well. Most of the additives basically came in on rumen enhancers. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes part of feed additives. And then you've got reproduction, hoof and foot health, lower methane. That's a hot topic right now, no question about that. And then, of course, mycotoxin binders, more about that in just at the end of the webinar. So what Hordes Dairyman does is a market survey. They go out to 3,000 of their readers. Now, that's important for those of you online. Remember, these are readers of Hordes Dairyman, so it may represent a 60-cow dairy or a 6,000-cow dairy as far as that goes. And I thought, Abby, for our people today, we'd look at a kind of a trend line, and you can see it jumps around. These are not the same people. Now, remember that, not the same people. And so you can see that. By the way, I'm not going to read this to you. Hopefully, you downloaded the PowerPoint. You can refer to them later. You'll see monensin in red. I put it in red because these are farms, not cows. And I think the companies that sell monensin would say those numbers could probably be more like 40–45% of the cows as far as that as well. You'll also see I got in red mycotoxin binders. We had a fairly friendly year, probably in 2023 in terms of needing mycotoxin binders, but notice almost 25% of the respondents traditionally are using mycotoxin binders. And I say that because we are getting pressure here to add that to our list. More about that in a few minutes. And you can look at the rest of them. And of course, there's always a small percent that don't buy any of these additives. And then of course, with our tight milk marketing, you nutritionists know that farmers are saying, you gotta find me another nickel, dime, quarter, and feed additives kind of get on the chopping block just a little bit. We then thought it'd be kind of fun to challenge you to think of who makes the decision on an individual farm if I'm going to buy feed additive X, Y, or Z. And in some cases, it's the dairy farmer. He or she may have enough background, know about these products. You're talking to someone who came down the lane and decided, yes, we're in, or no, we're out, as far as that goes. To me, the number one would be if you have a nutritionist on the farm, and they are very apparent, especially in California and Wisconsin, some of the major dairy states have a lot of nutritionists available, and they will make that decision as far as if that farm should use that feed additive. Dairy veterinarians can also play that role depending on what they do, what their role on the farm is. And in some cases, the dairy veterinarian is a nutritionist, and they depend on him because they see him as kind of a third unbiased source in terms of making that decision. And then, of course, feed companies will be a fourth player as well. And that depends a little bit on the salesperson's background and kind of what the company expectations are. And in many cases, they will select which feed additives you will be allowed to sell, or you should sell, or reinforce that equally as well. So let's move on then to our second part. And we're going to spend about 30 minutes on these four areas. Basically, acidifiers, zeolite, and vitamin D, plus the other ones as well. So let's get going here on this one here. And this is kind of a really hot area at this stage of the game. And so, Abby, let's go ahead and do our first survey and see what our listeners are talking about.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. The first question for all of you to answer is, how are you managing low blood calcium at calving? And you can select one of the following answers: a DCAD acidifier, zeolite product, calcium bolus or drench, or none of the above. So we have some great participation, Mike. Lots of answers are coming in, so it's good to hear and see. We'll just leave the poll open for another few moments. And all right, we can close that poll. And Mike,
Okay.
I'll share with you what everybody responded. Our top answer, 55%, were the DCAD acidifiers. Then at 34%, calcium bolus or drench. And then 6% for both the zeolite products and none of the above.
Very interesting. I found this, Abby, thank you very much. I found it really interesting because these products are out there right now, and some of them are kind of new kids on the block, as we would say as well. Well, let's talk about the acidifiers quickly. We'll cover these very quickly. There are basically two programs I see out on farms. We call partially acidification and fully acidification. And these are, of course, backed by certain companies and certain consultants as well. The good news is you can feed this for the entire dry period based on some work by Gary Etzel's done at the Wisconsin group there. The cost of these products can vary depending on source, somewhere in that 60 to 90 cents per day, depending on the level you're feeding. You also get, in some cases, other nutrients with that. And you must measure urine pH. I mean, if you are not going to measure urine pH, then don't get involved here, because that is going to be the gold standard to know if you are getting the right levels, and you're going to get some protection out there as well. Let's take a look at kind of 4 different calcium levels. You can look at calcium deficient diet, and there are some Eastern universities pushing this one. Boy, it's really tough, listeners, to get down below 40 grams of calcium here, try to stimulate the cow. Not a lot of long-term studies there. You can go to the NRC NASM, and you're going to be in that 50, 60 gram level. And then we're going to look at the 2 programs, partially acidified. And usually what happens is we're looking at urine pH is somewhere in that 6.2, 6.4 range here, fairly close to 6, and a small amount of added calcium. The fully acidified basically will be a much higher aggressive program. Urine pHs go down around 5.5 to 6, have a little bit more time if there's some variation going in the diets out there, and you must add more calcium. The workout here at the University of Illinois found under fully acidification about 29 to 30 grams being excreted in the urine. So you've got to get it right, and you can see those urine pHs kind of determine where you're at in terms of which program you're following out there on your farms. Another new product that's relatively new in the US, and that is the active form of vitamin D, and that is the 25-hydroxy D3, which is your vitamin D source there. excellent discussion by Professor Nelson from the University of Florida. They've done some work with it. It can increase calcium absorption. It has a role in immunity, memory development, and so it in some cases adds to the extra calcium as well. The real active hormone, actually you take vitamin D3, the liver converts that over to 25-hydroxy, and then the kidney converts that over to the active hormone, and that's a term that was used in the webinar of 125-hydroxy D3 at this point. You can feed the 25-hydroxy D3, it comes from Europe, 3 grams per day in the close-up period. It will also increase colostrum yield and perhaps milk yield, and in some cases it's approved, of course, for ruminants and other animals as well. And in some cases, it's fed along with a DCAD diet out there in the program. So that's a new product, come from Europe, and the researchers there can do some additive things in terms of calcium and other health benefits in the feeding program. Let's then go to the next calcium product that is probably the new kid on the block, and that's the zeolites. Basically, there are 2 types of zeolites out there. One is a natural zeolite, which can be mined from clay, and it is found in some of the mycotoxin binders because it is a binder in that sense, as you'll see here in just a minute. However, the commercial ones on the marketplace are synthetically and chemically produced zeolites, and they will vary in the concentration and the solubility of the product. So there's some small differences between the products, and here in today's webinar, we will refer to them as product A and B, so we kind of show some differences there as well. You'll see here in just a minute that it preferentially binds phosphorus, and that's the take-home message. Write that down, put that in your notes as far as that goes, and it will do some binding of calcium magnesium as well. Look at the bottom, because it really ties up phosphorus. You are not going to go long-term with this product, 14 to 21 days. My understanding, there's a few herds trying to go total dry period, but the companies are not recommending that in the feeding program, as you'll see. This is some really neat data on product A. It comes from the University of Wisconsin Research Group, and they gave us permission to share this. So this looks at basically 3 different products. In the yellow is going to be your control, and the blue is the DCAD product, and XZ is the zeolite product in red. The cut point in this study was 8.5 milligrams per deciliter. Some of you in Europe are expressing that as millimoles per liter, so you can read that on the left side of the chart, and you can see that they all go down right at calving. Blood calcium levels go down with all 3 products, but you'll see that the zeolite product keeps it above the cut point. And of course, with the DCAD product and control, if you follow the Cornell research, the question is, how quickly do your cows recover in blood calcium? And if they do that in the first 36 hours, the Cornell researchers suggest that may be your best cows in the herd at this point. And the only problem is I'm not aware of any cow side calcium test we can do, so you can actually determine, should I go in with a calcium bolus? But certainly if you look at the red line here, you could ask the question, do I really need a calcium bolus since the calcium levels are modestly high at this point? You want to look at those numbers from Wisconsin, you can see that on average, the zeolite product was 8.8 milligrams per deciliter, well above the green cut point. That green cut point, I've seen numbers anywhere from 8 to 8.2 to 8.5, so that varies from university and companies as well. You'll see in the DCAD product 7.8, and then the control diet 7.2. So certainly you can see what is the dynamics, if you want to use that, and the Wisconsin study is just priceless on this study. They also looked at phosphorus, and I'm going to cut in there, and there is your cut point coming in green again. And now you can see why some of our veterinarians and consultants are a bit nervous with the zeolite product, because you can see we really keep the blood levels low. But notice right after calving, when you remove the product, not only do they respond very, very quickly, but you get very high levels of blood phosphorus as well. So it looks like the short-term depression in blood phosphorus is not going to be a problem. You can see where the other products fit. They also drop a bowl. You can see on the blood levels as well. And I believe I have numbers there. There we can see there is your 4 milligrams, your cut point. And you can see those 2 products, somewhere around 5 to 5.5. And you can see the zeolite product, somewhere around 2.4 to 2.9. So certainly that's an important thing to remember when you're managing this in terms of how many days and what kind of responses you might see in your herd. The other thing they look at as well and that is a blood magnesium, and there's the cut point again. So let's click on that. That's around 2 milligrams per deciliter, and you can see again that the zeolite product does tie up magnesium, and so therefore the companies are recommending feeding higher levels of magnesium in the close-up dry period. So all this stuff is going to come together for you here very, very nicely at this point. But you can see how these products, again, the controls have the highest blood magnesium levels here, and you can see that the zeolite products are lower, but still above the cut point as well. But that matches some of the early work that came out of the Cornell University, and where they showed ties up of calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. And at that time, the emphasis was calcium. Today, folks, the real emphasis is going to be on magnesium. Some of you may ask what kind of production did we see in the Wisconsin study? And so they followed milk production for 7 weeks. And you'll notice there's a difference between second and third plus lactation cows. And you can see that the older cows averaged with product A, 112 pounds. The DCAD product, they were at 100 and basically 2 pounds of milk. And so that difference is about 10 pounds of milk. So certainly that's another factor that leads into here. And when you're looking at which kinds of products you might be looking at. So if you're going to be zeolite, remember we said with the DCAD, you must measure urine pH. With the zeolite, you must know how much phosphorus your cows are consuming in the close-up diet. And so you must know dry matter intake and phosphorus level. We'll see that here in just a minute. So you may wonder, what is the cost of this product? It'll jump around a little bit, vary from company to company, somewhere around $1.50 a pound. And in some herds, you're going to be feeding 2/3 to a pound of product here. Do not feed for the entire dry period, and we would not recommend top dressing it because the risk is that some cows says this top dress is good stuff, so I think I'll eat my share plus 2 other cows' share, and now we really messed up 3 cows because of this one cow deciding she's going to eat the top dress out there in the program. This is an interesting slide, so hopefully you will have printed it off. This again is product A. Product B will be slightly different in terms of how much product to feed. These numbers can go all the way from basically 7.5 to 10 grams of product, depending on its source out here. Notice the chart. We'll show you this in metric in just a minute. Same chart. You'll see that if the dry matter intake, for example, in the close-up group is 26 pounds, which might be a pretty good number here. And if you're feeding 0.3 to 0.35, you'll be adding about 0.7 pounds of product A to the feeding program. And then you'll see the guidelines listed at the bottom for added total dietary calcium and dietary magnesium here in the feeding program. For you folks that like to look at metrics, and especially our European and Canadian colleagues, now you can see that same chart. Again, this is product A again with it, and you can see these are grams. And for me, I kind of look at that maybe a little bit easier. So again, if my cows are eating about 11 kilos of dry matter, and in that middle part again, we'd be adding about 3/4 of a pound or 320 grams. So it really drives home the point. You must know those 2 numbers, dry matter intake and phosphorus levels. And I'm smiling here because on many farms, I'm not even sure my lactating ration number are correct. And in this case, you've got to get these numbers right to take full benefits of the program. Well, that completes that additive. The other ones will go a little bit quicker. Here's the hot ticket item right now. Everybody is talking about methane reduction, carbon footprint, and 2050 is coming, and we're supposed to be carbon neutral in the dairy industry. So let's take a look at these additives out here in the program. And so, Abby, we can do another survey and turn it back to you.
All right, listeners, this is our second poll question for you to participate in. Are you feeding a product to reduce rumen methane production? And please select one of the following. Are you using any essential oils, 3-NOP, ionophores, or I do not feed a product or don't believe it's necessary? If you would pick one of those answers, we'll leave the poll open for just a little bit.
Yeah, this survey goes pretty quick because it's pretty black and white, both of them.
Yep.
Really interesting to me, Abby.
So we'll close the poll and I will go through the answers here quickly. Just about half, 47%, said they're not feeding anything at this time. 32% are using an ionophore, 15% an essential oil, and 5% a 3-NOP.
Okay.
I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting information. I'll bet you a piece of pie, and some of you folks out there will smile, that 46% will change. That will change. And I think it reflects that people are still a bit cautious with these new feed additives, how they fit out in the program. Really, there's three ways of measuring methane on farms or in research studies. I should say on farms, but expressed on the research studies. And by the way, an excellent reference here is a book that comes from, actually, I think it's England, and it's edited by Professor Alex Histoff. It's called Advances in Sustainability in Dairy Nutrition. And for some of you, it's a great book. It comes from England. I got the book, and it covers just but there's 2 chapters devoted to basically this theme. Methane production, that's grams per day. And a lot of people talk about that one. Methane yield, this is grams of methane per kilogram of dry matter. That's going to be important here in the future. And certainly the next one is methane intensity, and that is grams per kilogram of energy corrected milk. So listeners, there's 3 ways of expressing that. So when we look at the research, make sure you know which one they are measuring out there in the studies. In the textbook from Dr. Histoff, in his chapter, he says there are basically 4 types of products that you 46% will be looking at. Methane inhibitor, these are your feed additives. In general, some of the best ones will be at minus 35% reduction. That's a big time number. Electronic sinks, basically tying up the hydrogen. Nitrates and fumarates, a 17% reduction. The problem with nitrates is the lower you have to feed could be toxic to your cow. That will reduce the milk yield in the world. That's supposed to be a joke. We'll move on, however. Vegetable oils, seeds, especially PUFAs, 19% reduction. And remember, you know what PUFAs can do to your butterfat test. And then tannins. You'll find tannins in forages. Primarily, that's a protection mechanism, and that's about 11%. So you see, there's a big range in these various products that you are going to be looking at here in the next 5 years, or you're looking at right now. The 3 we're going to look at today only are going to be monensin, essential oils, and 3-NOP. A lot of interest in seaweed. In fact, there's places in Hawaii and the West Coast, they are actually growing seaweed here, but there's some concerns with that. And here are some of the other products you'll find potentially coming onto the marketplace as well. Let's take a look at the summary of 3-NOP. 3-NOP, I'll let you pronounce that big long name for a Wisconsin farm boy. Holy smokers. Anyway, you can see a very aggressive product in the Penn State. I'm going to give you a summary here or a meta-analysis in just a minute. But basically, anywhere from 28 to 32% decrease in the 3 measurements. Over time, these will slip down. That's an important point to be thinking about with these products. Do they change if the cows have been on it for 100 days, 200 days effect? This product, no effect on dry matter intake, milk yield, or body weight change. A small increase in milk fat test. By the way, 90 grams of milk fat with today's milk price in the U.S. of $3.34. That's worth 67 cents. That's an important thing to think about when you look at costs going to these programs. There is an increase in methane reduction. They've done that test here. We're looking at about 1.5 grams or 60 to 80 parts per million is kind of the recommended level here. And of course, it's been approved in Canada and Europe. And now we should put the US in there. In the last 10 days, we could put the US there. The FDA has approved this product for use in the United States. So that's kind of been the big news in the last 10 years. Here is the study summary. I believe this researcher out of Switzerland. They looked at 13 different studies, 48 treatments, 14 experiments, lots of research here. And those are your 3 measurements. So 32% reduction in amount, 31% in yield, 32% reduction in intensity. So those are the 3 measurements right there. A note in that paper also indicates that higher NDF and crude fat increases methane production. The crude fat has to be a fairly saturated fat at this stage of the game. Starch will decrease it. So again, you can see some of the dietary effects coming in, and that paper appears in the Journal of Dairy Science for those of you that really want to dig into it. Here's another product that's in the marketplace. The first time I saw it was in Canada, and basically this is Eglin. This is a brand name, but there are other ones out there as well. These are the essential oils in there. You can look at that at your leisure, the sources of those, and what are some of the active ingredients out there as well. So certainly that's one of the things when we look at essential oils as well. This was a summary coming out of Animal for some of our US people. That's a major European journal. much like the Journal of Dairy Science. So this is a peer-reviewed paper, and they had something like 16 or 17 experiments in this group here. Some of that would be on-farm experiments, which means not carefully controlled. Some is university-based as well. Again, on this one, you'll see slightly different than we saw the 3-NOP, about a 4% increase in energy-corrected milk, and about an 8% and a slight decrease in dry matter intake, and that increases feed efficiency by 4.5%. You can put a dollar sign on that one as well. The decrease in methane is about 9%. So obviously it's not nearly as aggressive as what the 3-NOP product is going to be, and that's something you should be considering as well. My understanding is the 3-NOP product will be somewhere around 49 cents per cow per day, depending the level you're going to be feeding based on the calculations. This essential oil will be in the range of somewhere around 5 to 6 or 7 cents per cow. In Canada, farmers are being paid $4 per cow annually. This will not cover the cost of this essential oil, but if you get the increased milk production, of course, that's going to be a bonus at this stage of the game. Who's paying for that? That payment is coming primarily from companies that want those credits. Nestle's was one, Starbucks was another one that want that to be either one to buy those credits or being associated with that product. So the consumers are saying, yes, this is a green type product as well. Let's say a quick word about monensin. A lot of you know all about monensin, but there is about a 5% reduction in methane production. And that is primarily, again, going through the shifting of the rumen bacteria more to a propionic production level, and of course, more blood glucose. That has another benefit, but we're not covering that here today. It is labeled in the US, monensin, with a 2 to 4% increase in feed efficiency. The levels coming from one company, you can take a look at that at your leisure as well. And another company actually has a program that you can enter this information in, and it will tell you what that's going to be. Typically, you're going to be looking at about 3 cents per cow per day. So what you have to be weighing here in your mind is what is the cost of the product, what is the cash return, what is the impact it has on dry matter intake and on milk production. So these are the things you 46% that are using no product are going to have to weigh here in the near future. This is the meta-analysis on monensin, published by the Canadian researchers Dumfield Group, published in the Journal of Dairy Science. So this is a powerful study, just like the animal one is. So it's been peer reviewed, and you can see there is a slight decrease in dry matter intake. That's not on the label. Slight increase in milk production. Could be a slight decrease in butterfat tests, although the current research says fed correctly, you should not see a change in components, and it will have a change in milk composition of the butterfat because you will see an increase in some of the longer chain fatty acids. So there is your meta-analysis, and you've seen that in all 3 of those products out here. Let's then go to our update on essential oils. Obviously, the one product out of that I saw Eglin would fall into that category there. For our listeners, let's be clear, essential oils are not essential. We have essential amino acids, we have essential fatty acids for biology in the cow. Essential means the animal needs to have that supplemented, may not consume it in her diet or produce it by the rumen microbes. And so these are not essential oils, these are plant extracts. And in some cases, they're very aromatic, and it depends sometimes in human sources, you'll see essential oils and some of the creams that people will use, some of the bath oils and as well. They come from different parts of the plant. You can see it. A lot of these essential oils are basically used as a defense mechanism to kind of protect the plant, to keep from damaging the plant itself. Lots of different products. This was a review done, and by the way, in the review article, a booklet I mentioned earlier, Advances in Sustainability in Dairy Cattle, they've got an excellent chapter looking at the different essential oils and what their roles may or may not be. So here you can see the different functions. This was associated with, if you look at time, may improve digestibility. You can see other ones that lower stress, other ones have effects on feed intake and efficiency. So essential oils can do a lot of different things out there depending on which oil it is out there in the program. If you go to the Hordes Dairyman Feeding Guide, you'd find this in that chapter, looking at essential oils. What is their functions? You've already heard about those already. So you can read that at your leisure. And of course, that hydrogen status is a big one when we start looking at methane reduction as far as that goes. The typical numbers are somewhere around a gram a day, and that's true for all the products except for that. The monensin one would be slightly lower. The cost of the essential oils typically in that 4 to 6 cents range. The benefit to cost ratio was determined by a study out of the University of Wisconsin by now retired scientist Dr. Randy Shaver. And certainly we can see essential oils could be used for reducing methane, increased propionate production, which therefore helps in the hydrogen sink, and some of the products will improve feed efficiency. Notice we put it with experimental. And the reason experimental is that a lot of the oils, I just don't know which combination works best. And you saw one earlier here in this presentation, but that's a question you will ask if you're going to go with the essential oils. The last product we'll spell is a new kid on the block. Some of you probably have not heard much about this product. By the way, just a quick background here. If you want to look at the zeolite product, talking to the two companies in the U.S., one company has got 800,000 cows on zeolite. Another company has 400,000 cows on the study. That would be about 13% of the cows are on this product. Now, these are cows, not farms, and that really mirrors, Abby, pretty nicely with some of the data that we just picked up here just a few minutes ago as well. Now, the isoacids. Basically, this is a new product that's come out, produced by the Zimpro Corporation. And some of you gentlemen and ladies that are slightly old like me, you know all about this already. Back in the 1980s, you would have heard of Iso Plus, developed and marketed by Kodak Company. In fact, lots of research, excellent research. So the research in the 1980s still fits today because those products are still very similar at this stage. Why did it go away? Handling was a huge problem, both in feed mills and on the farm, and so it disappeared. These are your 3 branch chain volatile fatty acids on the marketplace now: isobutyrate, isovalerate, 2-methyl butyrate. So those are the 3 isoacids here that are being researched, and I'll show you the data here in just a minute. What does this product do? Well, this carbon source that can be produced by the rumen microbes will improve amino acids and NDF digestibility. And we'll tell you what that number here in just a minute is going to be. The cost of the isoacids, prepartum, about 20 grams, 40 grams postpartum. At the higher levels, that'll be around 30 cents per cow per day. Remember, we talked about the other additives we listed there. In the 3-NOP, that's 49 cents per cow per day, again, depending on levels. The research will show that's been conducted at the land-grant colleges about a 2% decrease in dry matter intake, about a 4.3% increase in energy-corrected milk, and therefore that yields, both of them will go the right direction. You look at feed efficiency, and that's about a 5.5% increase or improvement in feed efficiency. This is the big field study that we'll share with you. 37 herds, 65,000 cows. If you're wondering, according to the company, about 1% of the cows in the U.S. are now currently purchasing and feeding isoacids on their farms. 18 of the farms had dry matter intakes. Obviously, these are not individual studies. These are farm studies. So about half the herds, you can do a pen analysis, and you can see that difference there. It's about 1.6 decrease when feeding the isoacids and dry matter intake. Energy corrected milk, you can see up about 2.25 pounds more milk here. No effects basically on components. And if you look at feed efficiency or energy corrected milk per pound or kilo, whatever your weight unit is going to be, about a 6% improvement there as well. So certainly we see that. Those of you that are going to the ADSA meetings here in about 10 days to Florida, there are 5 abstracts there that are going to be presented on the isoacid products, and they go all the way from Ohio State, the University of Florida, South Dakota State, and Purdue. And 2 important things, in one of these studies, they did document an increase in milk production by about 2+ kilograms. So in that study there, that will be well in excess of 5 pounds of milk here. Another study, in vitro study, they measured the NDF digestibility. So certainly they really got some powerful data here. So what's the magnitude of those changes in these studies? About a 10 to 15% improvement in NDF digestibility. We all know what that means in terms of dry matter intake and energy for cows, and about a 6% increase in microbial protein. And we all know microbial protein is the optimal amino acid program out there on farms. So if you're going to be working with isoacids, this is an additive some of you want to take a look at, you have to feed higher levels of rumen-degraded protein, because that's where some of the isoacids come from. So certainly we basically deaminate those and switch those over to isoacids. In some of the studies being reported at ADSA and earlier, you may have to increase the level of urea to be sure to get optimal results on these cows. Basically, we already told you what these increases that are in from the database and from the ADSA meetings. Now, you might ask, why do you feed it to dry cows? And the reason for that, it takes a period of time for the rumens to ramp up and to get benefits from that. And of course, you have to take a real close look at these RDP values because some of you are feeding the low energy diets out here as well. The other thing that's interesting to me is that the Cornell people are going to be adding this to their software program. So there will be a software program out there that will actually calculate the grams of isoacids you need, and then you'll know how much you need to purchase based on the modeling effects from Cornell. So that's kind of exciting news as well. Well, let's start wrapping up this second part of our presentation, and that's on probiotics. And here again, the survey, again, coming from the HORDS survey that just came out, actually. I want to thank HORDS for sharing that information with me, but you can see that these are the different products, and these are all brand names. So we're not recommending one or the other, but you can kind of see what people are buying out here on farms in terms of the probiotic. Again, going back to your HORDS Dairyman Feeding Guide, if you look it up, you'll say, what do these products do? And they do a lot of different things. In fact, there's a whole chapter on probiotics in that booklet, the book that I mentioned there. That book is around $160. At least that's what I paid for it. And it came very, very quickly. It's an excellent, excellent text. And it's a big book, somewhere 400 plus pages. So obviously a great investment, brand new data in terms, and not only does it do probiotics, but it does other nutrients as well. The probiotics, the level, that's one of my problems I have. I'm not quite sure which probiotic I should be using. There are a lot of them out there, and the book chapter goes through those. The cost will vary somewhere around 5 to 15 cents per cow per day. Somewhere is probably around 2 or 3 cents for a calf. The benefit cost ratios, I could not find control studies to calculate that out. Our status is that we are recommending a probiotic be fed to a milk replacer fed calves. The data looks really good in terms of health, reducing the degree of health incidences, and stimulating calf starter intake. And those are always winners when raising young calves. For cows, probably at calving during the stress period there, and also under stress conditions as well. According to the book here, very little impact on probiotics, or quite variable responses on methane production as well. So our recommendations, you can see, is listed there, and we'll keep aware of that. Let's wrap up then with our Silage inoculants. Silage inoculants, again, the survey here is what was in the HORDS booklet from 2023. You can see a fairly major investment. So farmers certainly always are well aware of that. You can see it's gone up in price. You can see that not all farmers reported feeding this. About a third of the farmers are feeding this product. The good news is that in the 2023 survey, we saw a much greater increase in haylage. And if I'm looking at a vulnerable crop, I think haylage, baleage would be right at the top of my list because of the lower levels of starch compared to corn silage. Obviously, huge imports inroads into corn silage and high moisture corn as well. And of course, for treating baled hay to reduce mold as well. Those that responded in the survey were asked, why are you feeding it? And these are all good reasons. But if you look at the big ones, it's going to be retention of dry matter recovery. And typically that is about 3%. And then enhancement of nutrients, that could be protein, that could be starch, that could be sugar. That's another 2% as well. So you put these all together, then you get to this table, again, coming out of the HORDS booklet, and you can see how do they function. And you can all see how they can work very well. Those are the levels. You're using the Lactobacillus buchneri. That's usually around 400,000 colony forming units per gram of wet silage. A little bit more expensive, really effective for high moisture corn and for corn sides where you have high starch numbers. The cost there, somewhere 60 cents, can be very inexpensive to as high as $2 per ton. Some of them will have enzymes in them, and they may approach $3 per ton, affecting the fiber NDF digestibility. Based on the Kansas State research analysis, the benefit to cost ratio is 6-to-1, and that is based on nutrients saved and then fed to lactating cows. So obviously, if you're treating it for steers or for a cow-calf operation, that benefit won't be quite that high, and pretty much across the board, to be honest with you. So we are recommending them as well. Well, this is what I think every farmer should be doing once or twice a year, and that is doing what I call a fermentation profile, and ask the questions, did you control the fermentation optimally on your farm? And certainly silage inoculant is part of that. Part of that, of course, is quality issues, packing, covering, those kinds of things, stability of the feed in the feed bunk, lots of factors. But I would say every dairy farmer, if they're feeding legume grass silages, corn silage, high moisture corn, they should test those to see. And this table comes from University of Delaware and University of Wisconsin. Really good tables. And the data is out there that an effective inoculant will improve these numbers and direct that fermentation. So let's wrap up, Abby. We're just about down to our last 3 minutes. And I'm asking every one of you in this audience, you have this list. And so here's my list. Is mine right? No. But basically, it's farm specific. So I'm consulting on your farm. I'm going to look at these 6 products for lactating cows. And I will not read these to you. Notice monensin essential oil is grouped together. Some of our people online are organic or grass only farms. And obviously the essential oils can play very nicely there, where monensin is classified as an antibiotic or drug. And so you can read the other ones down here. So those would be my 6 that I would put in there. Perhaps this one is a useful slide as well, because it's happening around the United States. And this came up at a dairy meeting 4 or 5 years ago here in Illinois. And that farmer said, Mike, I love your list, but my banker will not let me buy all 6 of those. So rank them for me. So this is my ranking. It's how I would rank them out. Perhaps the first 2 are pretty straightforward. The one that is perhaps most questionable, perhaps some of you listeners, is organic trace minerals. And I think the organic trace minerals, zinc, selenium, chromium, and copper, just can have some real effects on immunity and animal health and blood glucose. These are enzyme driven. Some of these, selenium is obviously an antioxidant, and certainly these are powerful there. Some of you may wonder, how do I get bicarb and the S-carb so low? And the answer is, I could, or you can, design a ration that you can feed your way out of bicarb. The only time you cannot do that is probably going to under heat stress. And so under summer heat stress, sodium bicarbonate and potassium carbonate are big players. Here's my additives list. You'll notice the buffers disappear, although there are some of the calcium magnesium products on the marketplace. We saw them over at the Forest Aid Conference that can really function as a dry cow because there's no sodium or potassium in those products there. You'll notice chromium is listed there. That's the number we are targeting, 0.5 parts per million in the close-up ration as well. Rumen protected choline to keep the rumen very healthy for me. And then I would recommend one of the calcium strategies, either an anionic product or a zeolite product as well. You then go to the fresh cows, and again, hopefully you've got your list here. You'll notice I've got the calcium boluses there. Again, there could be some situations where you would not have to do that, but certainly works well with cows that are in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th lactations as well. And the list doesn't change very much. Yes, the buffer is back at this stage of the game. These are my what I call as needed lists. It simply says that if you have to drench for high levels of ketosis in the first 6, 7, 8 days after calving, propylene glycol drench would be used there. Certainly, if your herd is running at least 15% with high levels of ketosis, you'd fall in that category. I like calcium propionate primarily as a drench. A lot of people aren't drenching anymore, but it gives me a very available source of calcium and a glucose precursor going in as well for my liver. You can see the niacin. I'm using heavy cows, body condition score 3.5 or greater. And I think the data is very clear that the niacin can work. However, I've split it up into about 3 grams unprotected because there are some rumen benefits to niacin, and then 3 to 5 grams of protected because of its impact it has to get to the tissue level as well. Mycotoxin binders, basically, there are a number of them in the marketplace. They can be very effective, especially if your cows might have some risk with mycotoxins out here. And then acid-based preservatives, primarily for high moisture corn being stored in conventional storage, or baled hay that you would need to get off the field before it rains as well. So Abby, get ready for our take-home messages here. We are 45 minutes are up. I think this is the Hutchins bias. Feed additives can be effective and economical additions. It scares me when a farmer says, well, you got to save me some money, Mr. Nutritionist. And you say, oh, we'll take the monensin or the essential oil out. I think it's a big mistake. Also, as for published research, this may come up in the Q&A period, but you know, your farm, so much dynamics are going on, really tough to measure methane on the farm, for example. You keep monitoring for new research results, and hopefully we have shared with you some cutting edge research from various land-grant universities published in ADSA or from the University of Wisconsin. Just look for the new research results here. And then all of you must have your must-have additive list, and then you will tailor that to the farm that you're working with at this point. So with that, Abby, I'll turn the program back to you, and we'll see if we have any questions out here as well.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchins, very much for that presentation, the information you shared, and the advice and recommendations that you also delivered to the audience. So thank you so much. Thank you to Huva Pharma for sponsoring this webinar. If you would like to learn more about their company and products, please look them up online or check out the fact sheet that is attached to a PDF copy of the handouts. If you would like to view this webinar again, it will be available later this week. You'll receive it via a link via email, or you can find it on our website, where you can also find all of our past webinars on our archive. Just go to hordes.com and you'll be able to find them there in the webinar tab. Our monthly webinars always take place the second Monday of the month, so you'll see a few of our upcoming programs listed on the screen. In July, we'll have a presentation, Keep Cows Walking on 4 Healthy Feet. That will be presented by Carl Berge of the Save Cows Network and Dairyland Hoof Care Institute. And then in August, we'll have a presentation on making the most of this year's corn silage by John Gazer of Rock River Laboratory and Cows Agree Consulting. So if those topics are of interest to you, please make plans to attend. Now, we had quite a few questions come in, Dr. Hutchins, and they really are an array of topics. So I am just going to dive right in, and we will cover as many as we can. First, someone was curious about the book that you mentioned, and I will just explain that is the feeding guide that Dr. Hutchins wrote, and is available online from our Hordes Dairyman bookstore. So you can look it up there on our website, or you can contact our office and order it that way. But that's the feeding guide. So a lot of great recommendations and insight from Dr. Hutchins in there. All right, first question. Are essential oils labeled for improving milk production efficiency, or what is their functional label claim?
Abby, that's a good question. Most of the essential oils are GRAS, generally recognized safe to feed. And therefore, unlike the 3-NOP, which has a very specific claim because it tends to fall a little bit into the drug category, the claim there will be slightly different there out there in the feeding program. On the oils, I don't think they make a claim. If you go to a presentation or you ask for the research, you will see it in their data as far as that goes. So you know, the essential oils are much more flexible in terms of what the label is going to be. But a really important, Abby, hopefully that people were listening to see that these products have different responses in terms of milk yield, dry matter intake, fat levels, for example, and that's part of the thing you need to weigh along with cost or price to put the product in.
Mm-hmm. Sticking with that same theme, has any work been done on potential milk taint from essential oils? Any impact on the milk itself?
Yes, I'm not aware of any problem with that. I'm pretty sure the person is asking. We know that essential oils can have a flavor effect on it or an odor associated with it. I am not aware of any research that shows that you have to withdraw 2 or 4 hours before milking, like you have, let's say, if you have wild onion in the pasture or some of these other type of odoriferous weeds that you got to get the cows off several hours before milking. So I'm not aware of any residue or concern in terms of its impact on the milk odor.
All right, thank you. You touched on this a little bit, but are there feed additives that are available for organic dairy producers?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think that's where the essential oils will come into play. A lot of those are labeled to be have been sanctioned that they can be used for organic dairy farmers, and that's certainly one of the big questions when you're still looking at monensin versus essential oils, because that would be important. They also have certain mineral programs that have been certified that you can go ahead and use for organic dairy. So I think you want to talk to the supplier of the product to be sure that they are organic certified and that you can go ahead and feed that to you. So great question. Perhaps not the answer you wanted, but certainly there will be differences on some of these additives out here in the program. I would not think much of I would think the buffers would not be a problem, but then again, the question is, what is the buffer mixed with? In some cases, it could have that aspect as well.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Hutchins, should we worry about zeolite binding to trace minerals and reducing their bioavailability?
Wow, what a great number, and we've asked for that, and I don't know of any land grant research studies that looked at does it bind zinc or does it bind copper, and if you are feeding organic, would that make a difference? And I think the answer would be yes, it would be. So isn't ignorance a blessing in some respects? To be honest with you, folks online, I don't know that answer, that if the zeolite would tie up any of the divalent products, like magnesium is divalent, copper is divalent, obviously phosphorus is not a divalent ion as well. So I just don't know. I don't know, and I don't know of any research, and maybe somebody, and maybe one of the companies can send us, and we can get it to you, Abby, as a Q&A and put it in the Hordes Dairyman that direction.
All right. If we inject vitamin AD3E before calving, when would be the best time to do that? Any thought on that?
Yeah, the government recommends adding that 3 grams 21 days before calving, as far as that goes. And this is the 25-hydroxy D3. That has a D3 equivalent. They made that equivalent. That's about 120,000 international units of vitamin D. I don't think you want to feed 120,000 units of vitamin D. But in Europe, I understand there's less vitamin D supplementation compared to the US, where we commonly are supplementing D3 at 30,000 units at this point. And so basically, some of that can be converted over by the liver to the 25-hydroxy. By the way, you can actually analyze blood cows for that level. I'm not sure. You probably have to go to some university lab to get that done, but you can check the blood levels, and you can feed too much. And I think that's an important point also, Abby, with the essential oils, is that if 1 gram is good, 5 grams got to be better. And eyes wide open. The research is pretty clear that you can overfeed the essential oils, and same thing would be a concern with the 25-hydroxy D3.
You referred to the methane-reducing additives as a hot topic in an area that a lot of people are paying attention to right now. So we have some questions following that topic. So we'll dig into a few of those here. The first is there any synergy among the methane-reducing additives?
Boy, what a good question. That person should get an A+. The answer is we don't really know at this point. If I stack 2 essential oil products, 3-NOP, for example, and Eglin, would we get a double benefit at this stage of the game? I don't think that research has been done yet at this point. You know, also the whole question about seaweed. If I had seaweed and then 3-OP, would I get a benefit from that as well? I think if you've got my guess, are you listening and listeners? My guess is if you're feeding the recommended optimal level of that feed additive, I'm not sure there's going to be a big plus. Some of you are going to be thinking here, if you're thinking monensin, probably half of you are feeding monensin right now. And the answer is, well, if I put in 3-NOP on top of that, would I get a benefit from that? And I have not seen the data. So again, it isn't ignorance well, but folks, you're in a very dynamic area. So eyes and ears open, because I think that research will be coming shortly here, hopefully, either from Europe or coming from some of the university studies here in the US and or Canada at this point. So I am not aware if there is going to be a synergetic effect at this point, but it's really driven by hydrogen. And so if you can tie up the hydrogen, so if you had, if for some reason you have a ration, for example, high NDF digestibility, high forage diet, and then you might see some benefits if you were overlapping at this point. So it's a really good question.
So with these different products, you showed quite a broad range and how much methane could potentially be reduced, and then also some products have production benefits, while others might impact production either not at all or negatively. How do producers decide between the products, or what should they be taking into consideration?
Wow. Again, star to that person. They're listening very, very carefully as far as that goes. The use of these products will vary from different approaches. Some of these essential oils, the farmers are getting paid a fee. In Canada, it was $4 per cow annually. That will not buy that essential oil product, but with the production responses and dry matter changes, there was money on the table, and from that aspect as well. One of the other additives here, we're looking at money coming from the government here in the U.S. to help defer some of that cost associated with that. So that gets to be a factor as well. So the source of funding, where does that $4 come from, you might ask, in Canada? Well, it was coming from Nestle's, it was coming from Starbucks. These were companies that wanted to be associated with that technology as far as that goes. So certainly that begins a factor. If some of that money is coming from the government, we're having an election in November. And I would suggest to you listeners that there's a big difference on approaches between our two candidates here in the US, what they may have in the next 4 years. Some of that money is protected for 5 years theoretically, but governments can make changes as well. So certainly, those become factors out here in terms of investment. The 3-NOP product suggested that there would be at least a $20 profit per cow per year with that technology. So again, listeners, eyes wide open, and so you've got, it's just what you said, Abby. There's differences there in cost per cow per day, responses, very dramatic differences in responses here, and certainly a source of that funding as well. And in some cases, your milk co-op has to be partnered in the program. So that's another aspect. What type of contracts will be coming? And in all cases, there's always a kind of a third contract group out there that are working with that. Great question.
What about adding oregano to the alfalfa grass seeding next year?
Yeah, I'm not an agronomist, so you need to talk to an agronomist. If you can, I'm not sure you can plant oregano in with your other feedstuffs. I guess you can, because I just don't know that answer. So good question. Good question. Can't answer that. Just don't know if oregano would grow with your other forages on the farm and what level it would be in that product.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Are there any additives that claim to increase colostrum production?
Boy, that came up at the 4-state conference, and really not much. It looks like the 25-hydroxy D3 could increase colostrum yield as far as that goes. But that's been a huge question at most dairy meetings, and that came up also at our meeting last week at this point. I am not aware of any additive that is going to increase the quality or the quantity of colostrum. You all know about heat stress. That's bad news. We know that's bad news. The research out of Florida, we're not very excited about adding more metabolizable protein, and that would have been one thing you would think about as maybe being a possibility. So I am not aware of any additive, but then again, that would increase the colostrum yield or the levels of IgG in the colostrum. Good question. Sorry, I do not have a good answer for that one, or one that you can take to the bank.
Mm-hmm. We talked about this a little bit with the essential oils, but just in general, are there any additives that you know of that would have any aromatic or taste effects on milk?
I don't think so. And of course, the one that comes to mind quickly is the isofirm product, but then that has been handled appropriately. And that's, I'm not aware of any product that would have a problem that would pop up in the milk of the feed additives. That just thinking, kind of going through my mindset, thinking of all the different products out there, and I can't think of any of them that would be aromatically high enough that would end up in the milk as far as that goes. There's been some discussion about corn silage, that if you can pick up kind of a silage odor in milk, but generally speaking, most cows are consuming most of their diets several hours before the milking period, or at least the largest meals are consumed at that point.
How can someone decide which type of toxin binder is best to use?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think you want to ask yourself, or your nutritionist, or your lab, if you wish, are you looking at an aflatoxin binder? And our feeling has been that some of the clay products work most effectively there. If you've got more of aflatoxin tends to be, I think, kind of a warm season drought type product out there. If you're looking at some of the other toxins like the T2s, the zeolite, then some of the yeast cell wall type products, or some of the moss products appear to perhaps have more effect there. So we saw that here in Illinois a number of years ago when the farmer had aflatoxin and he had an additive that did not have the correct binder in. Once we got him the right binder, 24 hours, he was back on the market selling his milk as far as that goes. There are some enzymes out there, enzyme products that come out of Europe, and they are usually pretty specific for the type of mycotoxin out there. And so we stayed, and I think, Abby and listeners, a lot of the mycotoxin binders are dual now. So they cover both bases out there, and they can work for both types of potential mycotoxins that can pop up on the farm. So growing season gets to be a big factor, determining which one you may have, and then of course storage itself.
Very good. This is an interesting question. Mike, have you seen any data on methane-reducing products and reproduction impacts, either positive or negative?
Good question to the person. In most cases, these are short-term studies. So that's kind of the next big step that these companies are going to go through, and that is looking at long-term studies with adequate cow numbers. When you ask for reproductive responses, if you're going to go to a land-grant college, you're going to have to have probably well over 100 cows in these studies, and then long-term. A lot of these studies are 3 or 4 weeks in length, and that still begs the question. And I think 3-NOP does have some data showing that there is a slight reduction over the during the lactation period. The good news is that you do not feed that product in the dry period. It's not registered. It's not allowed to be fed to dry cows. So that could be a plus, which allows the dry cow digestive tract to adjust, however you wanted to go with adjustment as far as that goes. But no, I have not seen any there. The question is, if you're going to get a 6%, if you're going to get roughly 6% of the carbon is going out as methane, and you can reduce that by 10 to 30%, that carbon needs to go somewhere. And that could either be more milk, it could be more body condition, or it could be reproductively. And I'm not sure we segued in many of these additives where that extra energy is actually going, unless you see a milk production response.
Which additive would be best to optimize rumen fermentation under heat stress conditions?
Good question. To me, I think it's an easy answer. I think the buffer packs under heat stress, that are sodium and potassium driven are where I would go for heat stress. We're trying to get the DCAD probably in excess of plus 300. The workout of Maryland would say the sweet spot is close to 400. Not sure you want to buy that much buffer, but certainly that would be the additive under heat stress would be potassium and sodium carbonate. And there is some work that says you want to ratio those. In other words, you want to keep them, you don't want to just go with one buffer, because bicarb usually is cheaper than potassium carbonate, but the dual product usually has a better benefit because of the potassium losses and sodium losses under heat stress.
During the transition period, what kind of omega vitamins should be used?
I think on vitamin A, if you stay with NASEM, they're sitting somewhere around 90,000 units of vitamin A, international units. Vitamin D, somewhere around 30,000 there. There is some concern going over 50,000. That's where the 120, that's where the 25 hydroxy D3 could come into play at this point. We are a little more aggressive, but so is NASEM. That's the good news. About 2,000 IUs of vitamin E, and I would have these levels, especially the E, in the entire dry period, not just the close-up, because we know colostrum is really going to pull out vitamin E, as will a calf. I'll try to pull some of that across the placenta line as well out there in the program. If you look at some of the fatty acids, some of the essential fatty acids, then I'd be feeding them. Usually those are 18-2s and 18-3s. I'd be feeding them in the close-up period, and certainly until the cow is pregnant. So you're talking fresh cow during the transition period, and even if I go a little bit longer, I think the data is pretty clear. Those essential fatty acids can have impact both in the field and under controlled research studies on reproduction.
All right, we have a question, and it's in reference to the zeolite research done in Wisconsin that you talked about. Do you recall, Mike, were there any colostrum benefits discovered in that piece of work?
Not that I'm aware of, but that may be ignorance as far as that goes. No claims were made on the colostrum in both quantity or quality of it. And again, maybe those companies want to jump in and send me a note, and then we can get that back to you, Abby, in some way, maybe doing a Q&A or something like that. But I'm not aware of any colostrum claims. The milk production one where there was a parity or lactation related.
Sure. Which additives or maybe micronutrients would be useful in preventing mastitis in dairy cows? So we've talked about a lot of areas, and now anything in the milk quality area that you're aware of.
Well, the one that is got claims is the Omnigen product, and that one does make some claims on lower somatic cell count in cows. Any of those additives that reduce the stress load on cows can have some benefits. There are some yeast products that are making claims out there also on somatic cell count. So that's a tougher one. I'm not probably the right person to answer that question. One of your mastitis gurus that will be coming on in several months would be a great question for one of those to add.
We have one more question here.
Okay.
When talking about trace minerals, what would be your best strategy, or what would you recommend? Adding organic trace minerals with the inorganic trace minerals, a partial replacement of the inorganic trace mineral for organic trace minerals, or total replacement of inorganic trace minerals, switching to completely organic trace minerals?
Wow, what a neat question to end up with, or maybe there'll even be more. The answer, a couple different answers here. If I was in my dry cow program, I would go all organic selenium. All organic selenium. That's a Hutchins bias. The reason I'm going all organic, but we know the Ohio State shows that the organic selenium is more biologically available, and the government says you shall not feed more than 0.3 parts per million. And so if you want to say I wanted to get more biologically available selenium, that's where I would go. I think when you look at some of the other trace minerals, the chromium is organic, so it's pretty straightforward. I'd be feeding that during the transition, the close-up and fresh cows on the chromium. Zinc, copper, and manganese, I would replace 25 to a third of that with organic. Notice the word replace. I would not add on top. I think Bill Weiss has really showed pretty clearly that we just can't keep piling on more. So if you're targeting 900 grams of zinc total being supplemented in the diet, then perhaps 250 to 300 would come from the organic sources as well. One that seemed a little more exciting to think about, and that is there's pretty clear research, a couple of different universities, that the sulfate trace minerals do reduce fiber digestibility. And so there are some products available that you could do, some of the hydroxy organic trace minerals that you could look at and get away from that sulfur risk out there in the rumen itself. So there's about 3 different answers there in terms of when you'd go 100%. Economics become a factor, no question about it. So I guess if you're a rich and famous dairy farmer in Minnesota, you can replace them all. There are some companies that are looking at doing this, saying, can I reduce the amount of total trace mineral if I fed only organic or hydroxy sources there, and reduce it maybe by 50 or 60%. But that data is not, I've not seen that data showing that we can do that. Great question though. So those are Hutchins biases, by the way, all of them.
Well, we are always open to hearing your recommendations and insights. So I think that is where we'll end this Q&A. Thank you all so much for participating in the questions, and to you, Dr. Hutchins, for providing these answers. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Mike Hutchins from the University of Illinois for the information shared today and then answering those questions that followed. I'd also like to thank our listeners. We really appreciate the time you spend with us during these webinars. We know that people are tuning in from all over the globe and at all different times of the day. So we really appreciate you joining us, and we hope that you found some useful information here that you can use on your dairy or with the clients that you work with. I hope to see you on a future webinar. And until then, take care, and thank you for joining us from all of us here at Hordes Dairymen.